Heading into the playoffs, there were a ton of question marks over the Atlanta Hawks. A lot of people had the Knicks winning the series. Some people had the Knicks winning the series comfortably. I mean, when the other team has a superstar, an MVP caliber player in Julius Randle, can you blame them? And the other team, the Hawks, only had Trae Young, where a lot of these question marks stemmed from because a lot of people did not trust this Hawks team, and in particular their star player, Trae, because ever since he's entered the league, there have been question marks on question marks on question marks. Add to that, a lot of damn criticism has been put on his name. By the way, if there's that squeaking in the background that you can probably hear, that might be a rat in the floorboard, which I am prepared to smack it if I need to. I have done that before. I don't know if I need to reveal all of that information, but yeah, that's probably the squeaking, if you can hear that. As I was saying, yeah, there's been a lot of hate said towards Trae Young. Steve Nash, his idol, came out earlier in the season and said the way he draws fouls isn't basketball. I mean, it's not like a ton of other people do that, and that's just a common thing in the NBA, and he just singled out Trae Young, but that's what happened. So he said that. You had people question whether he's a good teammate, with John Collins and him apparently getting into a rift, even though that was quickly sorted out by the two. You had people questioning whether his play style could contribute to winning, whether he was a selfish player, he was a ball hog, you name it. There were question marks, there were criticisms, there were doubters, whether his play style would hold up in the playoffs, whether he was too small, whether he'd get exposed. Actually, they weren't really question marks. They were just people coming out and saying it for a fact. He's going to get exposed in the playoffs. He's too small. He puts up empty stats. He can't defend. He's a ball hog. He can't win games. Like, that was pretty much everything that's been said about him in the space of 3 years. And it's safe to say, over the first two series in these playoffs, a lot of people have gone a bit quiet on the Trae Young slander because they've seen that maybe those empty stats aren't actually empty, and when you surround him with good teammates, good pieces, and a great coach, all of a sudden you can win games and you can win playoff series with him as your best player. Now, before I go any further, if you could drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, that would be much appreciated. I make content like this every single day, and doing so helps out a ton. Normally there's not squeaking in the floorboards, but if that is annoying, I apologize. As I said, every single time there's been a narrative or this doubt put over Trae's name, he's been able to beat that doubt. First of all, it was the empty stats, or actually, if you go all the way back, it was in Summer League and the first few months of the season where people like Stephen A. Smith and other people said he was the biggest bust in NBA history, or he was going to be a bust, Colin Sexton was going to be better. You name it, those takes came out, and they were thick and fast after his first couple of months. But we're not getting all the way back into that. Just looking at the empty stats were the first narrative that came out after he started putting up big numbers. He was doing it, but he's not doing it on a winning team, so does it really count? Forget about his teammates. Forget about the fact their offensive rating was like all-time historically bad with him off the floor. That doesn't matter because he's not winning, and it's solely on him to win, even though it was his second year. That's kind of what people were saying about Trae, and that's what we heard. And then heading into the playoffs, there were people saying, oh, he's done it in the regular season, but can he handle the Knicks' elite defense? Can he handle the likes of Frank Ntilikina, who didn't even get on the floor? But you get the point. Can he handle those guys when they're coming at him? When teams have a chance to scheme against him and his team, can he handle that? And then after he handled the Knicks, they went on to say, would he be able to handle Matisse Thybulle and Ben Simmons? He won't be able to do anything against them. And again, he proved a lot of people wrong. And right now, there's just not much left to say about Trae Young, because as of right now, the guy who is apparently the worst defender in the NBA, the guy who is putting up empty stats, the guy who wouldn't be able to handle the playoffs, the guy who was bad for the locker room, who didn't even make an all-star team. He did not make an all-star team. Let that sink in. Someone who has probably been a top 10 player in the playoffs so far, not even probably, he has been a top 10 player in the playoffs so far, did not make an all-star team. The Ringer came out with their top 25 players in the league. He wasn't on that list. So he's not a top 25 player in the league. He's not an all-star. And, well, apparently he can't handle playoff basketball either. That's what was said about him over the space of this year. Things have been said about him over the space of 3 years. And again, he's just continued to prove them wrong, with now recently him taking a 2-2 series tie against the 76ers despite missing DeAndre Hunter, their second best defender and one of their most crucial pieces, particularly against the 76ers team with the wing depth they have. he's still been able to shred them despite the defensive players. You have 3 all-defensive players hounding him, and he's still been able to shred them in the pick and roll. He's still been able to shred them on every single occasion. Now, before I get into the Philly series, let's take it back to the Knicks series. Let's look at what he did against the New York Knicks, because again, this is where some of the skepticism started. Could he be able to do it against an elite defense who play a physical brand of basketball? The answer is yes. 30-10. Does that sound okay? Does that sound like empty stats? I guess if they lost, it was probably empty stats, but they won in 5 games, so they can't really have been empty stats. And just his ability to pick apart New York's defense was great. The last time these two teams faced off in the regular season before the playoffs, Clint Capella got 23 points or something, a lot of rebounds. He was dominant on the lobs. He was dominant as that pick and roll threat. So the Knicks said in the first couple of games, let's take Capella out of the game. Let's try to make Trae beat us with the floater. So, I mean, he did that because in game 1, he dropped 32-10 and a game-winning floater. Ironically enough, Capella didn't really get to the rim and it was more of an aggressive Trae. The next game was the only game of the series in which they lost. He ended up with 30-7 on over 50% shooting, and once again, the Knicks were forcing Trae into shooting the ball with Collins and Capella combining for 4 points. It was a rough night, but in reality, the main reason they lost this game, Nate McMillan has been a fantastic coach all year, one of my favorite coaches in the league. He left Bogdanovic and Trae on the bench for like 6 minutes in the third quarter. The Knicks went on a 17-3 run or something ridiculous, and the Hawks went from having the lead, or at least being, it was neck and neck, to the Knicks extending the lead, and they never recovered. It kind of sums it up when the only time you lose a game in that series is when Trae was on the bench for too long, and the Hawks couldn't create any offense. That's how good he is, and that was a bit of a coaching error by Nate McMillan. He's been fantastic, but that was the main reason for them losing that game. Going forward, they then won the next 3 games. Trae continued to pick them apart, whether it was with lobs to Capella and Collins, or it was him getting to his floater, him hitting them with threes. He just played a fantastic series, taking what the defense was giving him, and his passing was just on display for everyone to see. He even gave them a nice bow at the end of the game, in Game 5, in Madison Square Garden, dropping 36 points, a couple of daggers, and just sending them off, just all very nicely. As he said, it's all a show. So in the end, he just gave them a nice bow and said, thank you for your attendance. Off you go back to your houses that are probably filled with rats like mine right now. So that's what he did to the New York Knicks crowd. And it wasn't just Trae Young. Let's give some credit to the Hawks, which I've already done, so I don't really need to do this. This video is about Trae Young, but shout out to Capella, shout out to Hunter, shout out to all the other guys for their defensive play. Nate McMillan making the right adjustments. But at the end of the day, we're talking about Trae, and he sent off the Knicks in a very, very fun way. Then moving on to Philadelphia. That was just the New York Knicks. I mean, at the end of the day, they had a good season, but it's just the Knicks, right? He's not going to be able to do it against Ben Simmons, the real defensive player of the year. Joel Embiid, an all-defensive player. Matisse Thybulle's coming off the bench. He's going to hound him. If there's ever a challenge for someone who's a small guard, who should struggle with physicality, who should struggle with these guys with their length and just their defensive ability, it's this series. If he can handle this series, well then he's going to handle any series for the remainder of time. And well, we've seen that he's been able to handle this series. Has his shooting been off? Has his efficiency been down? Yes, he's shooting just above 40% from the field and just above 30% from 3. But at the end of the day, he's been able to dominate games without shooting well. I mean, over the playoffs, he's averaging 1.15 points per possession as the pick and roll ball handler, which is elite, on damn near 20 pick and rolls a game. He's been able to do it in the Philly series, regardless of going up against someone like Embiid, who's a good pick and roll defender. Even though he's limited, he's still a good pick and roll defender. Thybulle and Simmons are fighting over screens, and he still had his way with those floaters and those lobs. Those lobs that just consistently amaze me with how good they are. He'll throw them sky high to John Collins, and they just always connect. He's just been unbelievable in the pick and roll. And as I said, his shooting's been off, but he can still have a game where he goes 8 of 26, like Game 4, and still be the best player on the floor by a mile. 18 assists in that game to 2 turnovers. On the series, he's averaging, I think, 12 assists a game. His turnovers have been pretty low throughout the playoffs, considering the usage rate he's had with the defenders that he's going up against. To keep the turnovers low, particularly in Game 4, it just shows what he can do with the ball in his hands. And as I said, even though his shooting's been down, his playmaking has been as good as anyone in these playoffs. When you talk about the best passers in the NBA, a lot of people want to talk about Trae's scoring. I think just because scoring is the thing that people would rather talk about. But when you talk about the best passers in the NBA, you could count on one hand how many are better than Trae. And well, you wouldn't be doing much counting. I don't really know the best passers in the NBA, but Trae is definitely top 5 in that category. The amount of passes that he can make and he consistently will make is just, it's almost second to none. He's that good as a passer. And then scoring wise, he can create. He can get to the free throw line. He can shoot the 3-ball, even though he's been struggling in this series. And he can make big shots and big floaters and get big buckets for a team that needs his offense. I mean, it's really exemplified by the fact when he's off the floor, they have 102 offensive rating. And when he's on the floor, they have 115. It's just a huge difference when he's off the floor and when he's on the floor. And that's been the case all throughout his career as a Hawk. When he's off the floor, this team cannot create offense. It's got better with Bogdanovic coming in and other guys coming in like Gallinari and Lou Williams, but still with him off the floor, they're a bad offense. With him on the floor, they're a good one. It's really that simple, and that's maintained itself throughout the playoffs and throughout the regular season. And all these people that questioned his liability as a defender, which, don't get me wrong, he's not a good defender. He's bad. He's really bad because he's just tiny, but he gets out of the way most of the times, and he's smart enough to realize that, and he'll try to hide himself, which again, some people might say, oh, he's just hiding himself on Seth Curry or Furkan Korkmaz. Yeah, sure, but at least he recognizes that. And then what he gives you on the offensive end of the floor, I'll take him being a bad defender every single day of the week. When I can get that kind of playmaking and that kind of scoring, it's once in a generational type of playmaking. It's once in a generational type of offensive creation. And we're seeing that Trae Young is ready for the playoffs. He's ready for the moment. And all these people who said that he wouldn't be good in the playoffs, I mean, they've all pretty much been silenced by Trae in these playoffs. And he's cemented himself as one of the best 10 to 15 players in the NBA. If he can somehow pull off this series win without DeAndre Hunter against a fancied and more talented 76ers team, we're going to have to really question just how good he is, because as of right now, he's really good, but he's got a chance to be genuinely great the way he's been playing, and I think people are finally starting to recognize that.